This is Michael Popok, Legal AF. Justice doesn't sleep on a Friday. We've got a motion that was filed by Jack Smith. We just got our hands on, here it is, because it's been unsealed by Judge Chutkan, related to Donald Trump's continued campaign of harassment of potential jurors, the judge in this particular case, prosecutors, member of the prosecution team, and everybody else. His unbridled attacks have been accumulated by Jack Smith and put into this motion to stop him from making continued extrajudicial statements outside the courtroom to prejudice these proceedings. And the fundamental basis is found on page 14 of the motion, which has just been unsealed today. It's been sitting on the docket since the 5th of September. We've been waiting patiently to see what it looked like. And just today, in another order issued by Judge Chutkan, after she went through the analysis of why this first the motion that was first sealed by the government should now be unsealed so that the public can see it, so that they can have confidence in the justice system and the judicial system. We're just getting it now, and so that we can unpack it for you here. And right in on page 14 is a Supreme Court quote that sums up what Jack Smith, the special counsel, is trying to do by way of this motion, and the judge should do, because it points out that Donald Trump is the ringmaster of and quoting from the case of Shepard v. Maxwell, a carnival atmosphere of unchecked publicity and trial by media rather than our constitutionally established system of trial by an impartial jury. That is exactly, that quote from that Shepard case from the United States Supreme Court is exactly the reason that the judge should ultimately grant the request by the Department of Justice to enter 2 narrow orders in this case to get Donald Trump under control. Never going to be able to gag him because of certain First Amendment rights and other rights that a defendant has, but you can limit what he says. And so what the government wants is 2 things from the judge, and then I'll tell you what evidence they provide about Donald Trump from his own fingertips on social media, from his own mouth at rallies and interviews that they use, of course, against him, as we always said they would, here in this particular motion, including violent attacks on Judge Chutkan herself that actually led to somebody making an assassination proposal, an attack on the judge by leaving a voicemail message on her chambers saying that she was they were going to assassinate the judge as an byproduct of Donald Trump's behavior. And I'll tell you as a little bit of a teaser that the way that Jack Smith does it in the motion is masterful, because he links all of this attempt by Donald Trump to undermine the public's respect for and confidence in the justice system, the exact same campaign that Donald Trump led, that's mentioned and it is the focus of the indictment, to undermine the election process. This linkage between all he does is undermine the institutions of our society. And we're just seeing chapter 2 of that same playbook is brilliant. A brilliant way to both remind the judge of the indictment, ring that bell once again, and then of all the bad things that Donald Trump has done since the last time they were all in court together. The 2 narrow things that they want, which this judge should grant, is under a local criminal rule 557.7. The government wants the judge to restrict Donald Trump and his lawyers from saying anything about the parties in the case, the witnesses, and the attorneys, which would likely interfere with the rights of the accused, Donald Trump himself, to get a fair trial by an impartial jury. Stop trying to pollute the potential jury, which is referred to in the business as the jury veneer, the future panel from which the jury will be selected. Because it's against your own interest, Donald Trump, because all you're doing is corrupting the justice system. You think you're speaking to that future juror who's going to be MAGA and hang the jury. All you're doing is making the jury afraid of you, and therefore that's a bad thing for your 6th Amendment rights, and you'll have no one to blame but yourself. So that's the first order that this motion is looking for. As I like to train my associates and my attorneys, I tell them, get to the point. Because the judge in a hearing wants to know 2 things and is tapping their foot waiting to hear what they are. 1, why are you here? What is the motion you're on? And two, what do you want? What do you want me to do in response to that motion? So that's the first thing. The order to limit Donald Trump from attacking continuously or at all parties, witnesses in the case, potential witnesses, and attorneys, mainly the prosecutors. They left out the judge, but they do mention at length all the attacks on Judge Chutkan herself, including the very ugly social media post by Donald Trump himself. And the second thing they want, it's a little complicated, but I'm going to unpack it here for you on this particular hot take. It has to do with what you're able to do to create what's called a mock jury to practice your case, whether you're the prosecution or the defense, in front of potential jurors. So in order to do that, you generally are talking to people who could ultimately be in the jury pool. And so they want a limitation on how and when and with or without authority or permission, the lawyers for Donald Trump and others can conduct jury studies, right? Figuring out what the best juror would be. There's a whole body of work. There's a whole cottage industry devoted to what we call in the litigation trial business, jury science. How do juries make up their mind? What's the best combination of jurors to have in the room? Demographically, age, religion, background, race, gender, whatever it is. What is the best combination? Some cases, the jury study may say an all-female jury would be great. Some studies might say an all-male jury or an older jury or one that has people that used to be in law enforcement. We could do this all day long. That's jury science. And so in order to be ready to pick your jury, right, you either hire a jury consultant, which Donald Trump will likely do, to help him pick that jury, because you pick a jury. There's a panel that's brought down. It is interviewed and questioned in a process called voir dire, right, where you're asking the jury, the potential jury questions. And then there's a selection process where you get it down to 12. It's 12 here, could be 9 in other cases, 6, 9, or 12, depending upon the court that you're in, for jurors in the box with alternates. And then you have what's called peremptory challenges, which are, I get 5 or 6 or 8 challenges on my side just because. I can't do it on the basis of race. I can't get rid of all the black and brown people, which I know Donald Trump will try to do. But you because there's Supreme Court law precedent that says you can't. But you can use it like, no, I'm not sure after the questioning. I like potential juror number 9. And so each side gets their peremptories. And then you get what's called, there are for cause challenges or excusals of jurors, usually by the judge, because the person just can't be fair and impartial. Something's happened in their life. They have made up their mind about Donald Trump one way or the other, and so they get excused. And then you get to your jury, and it takes a couple of weeks, or could take, I'd say in the federal court, take about a week or a little bit less to get your jury in the pool, in the box. So the federal prosecutors don't want Donald Trump using, under the guise of conducting a jury study, to pollute the jury and the potential jury and put statements out into the public. So they want anything that he does related to jury selection and consulting to be approved by the judge in advance. These are pretty mild, by the way. They're not seeking a gag order. Everybody wants a gag order. Stop Donald Trump from talking at all. Stuff a sock in him. Okay, I would like that too, but it's not going to happen. And they're not even asking for it. Yet, Donald Trump decided to oppose this motion because he doesn't want to stop raising money on the backs of lies. And as they said, Jack Smith said in his motion, Donald Trump, knows that for every statement he makes, there's a reaction. For every action, there is a reaction, right? There are attacks on witnesses. There are attacks on people that he sees as his enemies, and he's convinced his followers to see as their enemies. And that has to stop. And this was basically also an excuse for the Department of Justice to put together all of the social media and comments made by Donald Trump that went after and attacked people. Let me read to you now from the motion itself, because it's so important, especially how the government sees the case. This could almost be taken from the opening statement of the government when they start the trial of Donald Trump. And this is on the first paragraph of page 2 of their motion. As set forth in the indictment, after Election Day in 2020, the defendant, always Donald Trump, launched a disinformation campaign in which he publicly and widely broadcast knowingly false claims that there had been outcome determinative fraud in the presidential election and that he had actually won. In service of his criminal conspiracies, through false public statements, the defendant sought to erode public faith in the administration of the election and intimidate individuals who refuted his lies. The defendant is now attempting to do the same thing in this criminal case, to undermine confidence in the criminal justice system and prejudice the jury pool through disparaging and inflammatory attacks on the citizens of this district, the District of Columbia, the court, Judge Chutkan, prosecutors, and prospective witnesses. The defendant's conduct presents a substantial likelihood of material prejudice to these proceedings, and the court should take steps to restrict such harmful extrajudicial statements. That sounds like an opening statement. They then go in the next section of the motion to walk the court through Trump's history of inflammatory and misleading statements that he knew or should have known would cause others to harass and harm his critics or adversaries. And then they talk about all of the people, right? Georgia election officials who got death threats after Trump identified them on his then Twitter platform, where they had, one tweet changed their life for the worse. And that was testimony to the House Jan 6 committee that is reproduced, although redacted. That blackout is in the document because the court has seen fit to have certain parts of this redacted, so there's not more doxing of these particular people. Also talking about how an election worker had their home address placed on the internet. We know that is likely, I hate to dox them, but they're public about this. We know Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss, who have a defamation suit against Rudy Giuliani, are people that have complained about this very thing. And they required additional police protection. It goes on to say that Trump knows that when he publicly attacks individuals and institutions, he inspires others to perpetrate threats and harassment against his targets. And he talks about a press conference held in Georgia by the then Secretary of State, where the man pleaded for Trump to stop because somebody was going to get killed. That's a direct quote. There's also reference to Chris Krebs, the head of cybersecurity for Donald Trump, that as soon as he said it was the most secure election in the history of all U.S. elections, Donald Trump fired and then attacked him. And the same thing, as we said, with Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss. And the motion goes on and takes a quote from Donald Trump at his own town hall just this past May, the one on CNN, where he said, and they quote from Donald Trump, "My supporters listen to me like no one else." That's the point. And the fact that you're using third parties like you did to attack the Capitol, like you did to harass your adversaries and enemies, like you're using and the puppet master for the MAGA Congress, you're doing it again for the justice system and for our judicial process, just as you did for our election process. And then he goes on to remind the judge, not that she needs to be reminded, that he has been attacking the court system and her particularly as a member of Marxist leftists. Everybody's anti-Trump in the District of Columbia. I can't get a fair trial in the District of Columbia, and so on. And it's all rigged by Joe Biden. Then they go on to talk about all the attacks on the special counsel's office, including lies about the special counsel's office and their role in this case, and making up claims that they were not independent from Joe Biden and Merrick Garland when they are. And they cite in the motion chapter and verse where Donald Trump has lied in trying to associate the special counsel with Joe Biden particularly. Then they talk about the witnesses that Donald Trump has gone after. Mike Pence being mercilessly attacked on Truth Social and in rallies by Donald Trump. Bolstering testimony of witnesses is also a bad thing. That's the opposite of attacking. That's where you want to increase the credibility of a particular witness. It's called bolstering. And so you say things like about Rudy Giuliani, he's the greatest mayor in the history of New York City, and he was just arrested. The election was rigged and stolen. So now you're bolstering testimony while you're tearing down the future testimony of other people in the minds of the future jury. And then they turn to Judge Chutkan, even though they don't, it's interesting, they don't ask for an order to protect her because she's in a black robe. However, we know we live in a society where crazy people do bad things, including assassinate judges and their families. And that's happened in recent history. And so they remind the judge that there's been racist death threats lodged against her since he started tweeting about his relentless public posts. This is their quote: marshaling anger and mistrust in the justice system, the court. And then in particular, they said even the jury is scared of him because they pointed to one of the recent Jan 6th cases in which the jury, and we did a hot take on this, Ben Meiselas right here on the MeidasTouch Network did it, in which the jury wrote a note to the judge and said that they were scared of the defendant because he may have their home addresses. So this is the milieu, this is the stew of animus, of venom that Donald Trump promotes. And in a way, he's undermining his own ability. That's the point of getting a fair trial. Because for every Trumper that he's stirring up, he's turning off another potential juror who needs to be fair and impartial in reviewing the evidence that's presented in the courtroom. Because it's not supposed to be a carnival-like atmosphere. Back to the case that started this hot take, it's supposed to be one of fair justice in a courtroom. And then they reminded at the end of their motion that orders of the judge and admonitions by the judge to the defense works. They cite the fact that before John Lauro, the lawyer for Donald Trump, was admonished by the judge in a protective order, he was out on the Sunday morning talk show circuit, hitting 5 or 6 talk shows on one Sunday morning, doing everything he's not supposed to do, making statements outside the court in violation of local rules about the trial, the case, the defenses, the evidence, and the witnesses. You're not allowed to do that. And they said, here's an example, Judge. When you called John Lauro out on the carpet and told him to stop it, he stopped. In fact, the government said, we've searched. We haven't found one more word from John Lauro since you, wearing the black robe, told him to cut it out. Do the same thing for Donald Trump. Because if you don't, you see that if you give him a fingernail, he takes a nation. That's where we're at with Donald Trump. That motion is now unsealed, even though, again, just to remind everybody of the procedure, although it was filed a long time ago, it's now been docketed as document number 57, if you're playing the Donald Trump on trial home game, today, 19 pages. It had originally been filed sealed, but not redacted with black lines back on the 5th of September. And then the judge issued an order in which she analyzed the factors in which the public has a stake in learning about public information, but she also balanced that against certain non-public information that the public doesn't need to know about and isn't really relevant to the trial. And that's why we got some very limited redactions, so limited that we can easily figure out the names of people that have been redacted. But that's how Judge Chutkan runs her chambers. She has given the other side now, Donald Trump's side, a briefing schedule. They can oppose this motion, which we know they will. They have until the end of the month. Then there's going to be a reply brief by the government and a likely hearing. And then sometime in October, the judge is going to make a ruling. In the meantime, there is no order in place, but every time Donald Trump opens his mouth or runs his fingers or has a surrogate do something, it's going to be updated, I assure you, with an amended supplemental motion by the government submitting additional evidence that he's just won't stop. Because we know Donald Trump won't be chastened by this. He won't be like, oop, I better tone it down for the next 4 weeks until the judge rules. He's not. If we know him, he's crazy. He's gonna go the opposite way. He's gonna make it worse. As I've said in prior hot takes, this is like the little boy that puts his hand on the stove, and when that doesn't work, he puts his entire face on the stove. So Donald Trump's going to keep testing, pressurizing, intimidating, and then all that Jack Smith can do is just continue to build his case of evidence, linking it so elegantly to the actual indicted acts. The undermining of the election system is the exact same thing as the undermining of the justice system, as we're seeing right here. I'm covering this kind of stuff on hot takes just like this one, only on the MeidasTouch network, exclusively right here on this YouTube channel. Help them, MeidasTouch, get to 2 million free subscribers. They're so close. Help them cross that threshold sometime this fall. Really, really important for democracy. And then we put all of these kind of hot takes together, or at least the stories. We curate them in a podcast we call Legal AF. It's what you think. It's every Wednesday and Saturday, also exclusively on the MeidasTouch network. I do it on Wednesdays with my co-anchor, a former prosecutor, Karen Friedman-Ignifilo. On Saturdays with one of the co-founders, MeidasTouch Network, Ben Mycelis, and we put it right here on YouTube. We do it live on Saturdays and Wednesdays, and then you can pick it up on audio. And then if you want to find the entire body of all the work that MeidasTouch does, including the legal and political analysts like me, Karen, and Ben, go to their new website, MeidasTouch.com. Go over, you'll get all the original content that's there, that's written by like a whole newsroom that's now been developed. It's like the old newsroom days, like the Washington Post or the New York Times, by MeidasTouch, and then all of our audio content by all of our contributors, including the Legal AF ones. Until my next hot take, this is Michael Popok, Legal AF.
Hey Meidas Mighty, love this report? Continue the conversation by following us on Instagram @MeidasTouch to keep up with the most important news of the day. What are you waiting for? Follow us now.